Chapter 4. Zack spent the rest of the day messing about at the house. He would have preferred to stay at Otterenga Bay with Jess and Will McGonagall. That's where all the action was. But unfortunately, that idea had been scuttled when a news team arrived. Even before the helicopter had come into view, Crawford was hurrying as best as he could back to the ute, screaming at Zack to get in. There had been no chance to say goodbye or anything. Now he was stuck back at the house with only Sheep and Pakuko to talk to. Crawford was working on the book. The house was in a group of buildings known as Terawhiti Homestead. The place they were using sat a little apart from the others and was the only one occupied. Behind the buildings, the tree and scrub-covered hillside rose steeply to the ridge where the turbines began. Between the hills and the sea is the largest patch of flatland anywhere along the southwest coast. Those 60 hectares had been attractive to pioneers seeking land in the 1840s and were the beginnings of Terawhiti Station, which now totaled several thousand hectares. When most of that was steep hill country, the paddock through which Zack walked was much like the farms you would see anywhere around the country. He wasn't really walking anywhere in particular. He needed to get out of the house and go to Tongue Point had seemed like a good idea. He was hoping for a view around to Otterenga Bay, where there seemed to be plenty of action. Helicopters had been heading that way ever since they got back. Zack could understand all the interest. Mikhail Popenoff had been big news for much of the summer as he cruised around the country in Anastasia. Apparently, he was investing heavily in several big development projects. But these investments weren't what got all the publicity. This came from the man's lifestyle and the pair of stunning women who were often attached to his arms. While not a lot of publicity was given to how he earned his billions, there was plenty about how he spent them. Payouts to his previous 4 wives had taken quite a chunk. An English Premier League football team used up $1 billion or so, as did a Formula One racing car. Then there were the huge donations to wildlife conservation, which interested Zack the most. Photographs and video of Mikhail Popenoff often showed him posing with exotic animals in some remote part of the world, and this gave Zack the thought that the animal on board Anastasia might not necessarily have been a dog. There was no view around Otterenga Bay. Steep cliffs blocked the way. There was, however, a view down to the track that hugged the coastline. 30 meters below the paddock was a shore platform with a gravel track winding among the rocks. It was in use. Several four-wheel drive vehicles were racing towards the bay. They had to be transporting those who couldn't afford to hire a helicopter. From his vantage point, Zack could see that they too were going to be disappointed. The cliffs blocking the view would also block vehicle access. Huge waves were washing into them. The occupants would end up having to watch TV to find out what was happening, just like Zack and the rest of the country. Crawford was cooking dinner by the time Zack got back, or, to be more accurate, he was defrosting 2 of the many frozen meals they'd bought when they arrived in Wellington. In the freezer, there were also sausages, steak, and other stuff that would require more detailed preparation. But Crawford considered watching the news that night more important than cooking food. He wanted to see if they appeared in any of the shots, and if so, if it would blow their cover. He didn't have to wait long to find out. The wreck was the lead item. It started with an aerial shot of the wreckage on the rocks and debris floating in the bay. Then it pulled back to show the shoreline where Crawford's ute could be seen. It was in shot for such a short length of time that nobody would really pay it any attention. Crawford gave a brief grunt of satisfaction. Next came an interview with Will and Jess. From the way the interviewer asked the questions, it was obvious she thought it was they who had discovered the wreck. Neither of the McGonagalls said otherwise. Footage of the rescued sailors followed. There were 5 of them, all men. Only one was interviewed, and his English was so bad that it revealed little. All the interviewer could extract was that the yacht had been struck by a big wave in the abandoned ship. There was no mention of any dog being aboard the Anastasia, or any other animal. After an ad break, an Australian correspondent came on live with Mikhail Popanoff. In sharp contrast to the grunts of his crewmen a few minutes earlier, Mikhail spoke fluently and with just a hint of an accent. "I am relieved," he said, "that the crew is safely ashore." The interviewer asked if there had been anything special on the yacht. For a moment Mikhail seemed lost for words. His eyes moistened. "There were many things," he eventually said. "Anastasia was special. She was an important part of my life. I will miss her." "Will you build another?" "I am not sure. It is too early to decide. I am still suffering her loss." Once more there was nothing about an animal, which had Zack wondering whether he got it all wrong. Maybe there had been an animal called Tasha on board while the yacht had cruised around to New Zealand. If it was Mikhail's pet, then it could have gone with him to Australia on the jet. Perhaps Tasha had many different beds, toys, and food bowls around the world. The news bulletin moved on to other items which Crawford would watch until it had finished. Zack went to his room. There he had his own personal entertainment system, a television, DVD player, game console, and internet connection. When he first heard of his dad's planned exile, Zack had insisted he wouldn't go unless he had things to help him fill the time. Crawford's response had been to visit one of Wellington's second-hand shops. Shiny new gadgets had been off the shopping list ever since Stanley disappeared with the family's savings. Zack started a game, but soon abandoned it. He couldn't concentrate. Something was niggling away at the back of his mind. He started watching a DVD, only to give up after half an hour. There was nothing worth watching on TV, so he went onto the internet and Googled Popanoff pets. There were thousands of hits, but the pets were all women, not the sort of pet that Zack had in mind at all. He continued searching for links between the billionaire and animals. There was little enthusiasm to his search until he turned up a photo of animal tracks crisscrossing a snowfield. This was enough to release the information that had been niggling at the back of his mind. "Paw prints," he said out loud. "I saw paw prints." There had been an animal on the beach that morning. It might not have come off the yacht, but there was at least a chance that it had. From then on, Zack's searches proved more successful. Among other things, Mikhail Popanoff was an active campaigner for protecting wolves in Russia. It was not one of his more popular sponsorships, for in some parts of the country, wolves were a problem. However, Mikhail claimed that if something wasn't done to protect them, they might soon disappear, and that might cause another problem, for no one really knew what effect it would have on other wildlife living in the icy wildernesses of northern Russia. Zack was staring at an image of the billionaire with a wolf cub when there was a knock on the door. "Can I come in?" called Crawford. Zack looked at the time on the computer. It was after 10. 3.5 hours had somehow disappeared. "Yeah," he replied. "What are you up to?" asked Crawford as he stepped into the room. "I've been thinking about that roll D that just found, wondering what sort of animal might have played with it." Crawford looked at the screen. "And you think it might be a wolf?" Zack shrugged. "Could be a tame one." Crawford shook his head slowly. "No, Zack, your imagination is running wild again. If there was a dog on that yacht, more likely it would be a miniature dog. That's the sort you'd find on billionaires' yachts. Do a search for Russian dog breeds." Zack did, and found a miniature variety, a ridiculous-looking thing that had no right to be called a dog. Those teeth marks on the Voldy were made by something bigger than that, he said. Yeah, probably, said Crawford. Scroll down and see what else there is. All the others were much bigger animals, hunting, fighting, shepherd or guard dogs. Most looked as if they had been bred from wolves. Okay, said Crawford, sitting down on the bed. Let's assume that it is some sort of wolf dog, and that it has come ashore. If so, then it won't be the first time something like this has happened. What do you mean? Asked Zack, even though he knew he could be letting himself in for another lecture on the history of Terawhiti. 40 years back, they had major dog problems around here. They were mostly strays from Wellington suburbs, such as Terawhiti. Some would visit for a few nights to attack sheep and then return to their owners. Others made this area their home and started breeding. Some years, hundreds of sheep were killed. Only a few of them were eaten. The dogs hunted the rest for sport, so many that the farm was losing money. Something had to be done. Crawford glanced at Zack, checking to see if he was listening. He was. That something was to bring in deer stalkers to shoot them. They killed plenty, but the dogs had been around for some time, were too cunning. One dog, in particular, a big Alsatian bitch, proved to be impossible to get. She was born on the property and had reverted to the wild. Crawford paused to point to the screen. She would also have had wolf genes, and I guess it was those instincts that took over. She became a legend. The Terawhiti Ghost, she was called. Somebody even wrote a poem about her. Over the years, she killed more sheep than all the other dogs put together. The deer stalkers couldn't get to her, nor the police. Even some army guys tried. They failed too. In the end, it was the wind that caused her downfall. This time his pause was long enough for Zack to think the story had finished. How? He asked. Crawford smiled. Apparently, it was a day just like this morning, with the wind howling in off the sea. The manager was going down to Karori Stream, that's just to the east of here, when he saw the sheep behaving strangely. He went to investigate and heard barking. Taking the rifle off his back, he crept closer and caught the bitch feeding. He shot her before she was even aware of his presence. If it hadn't been such a strong southerly, she would have caught his scent or heard him and been well gone before he got near enough to shoot. So, in a way, it was the wind that killed her, not the bullet. Either way you look at it, she was dead. The Terawhiti Ghost was no more. A death that I'm sure nobody on this property mourned. They were silent for a time before Zack said, And you think it might happen all over again? Crawford shook his head. No, not really. If there had been a dog on the yacht, the crew would surely have mentioned it. So don't let your fantasies start running away with you. Believe me, there's not going to be another Terawhiti Ghost.